This film is based on a study that took place in Toronto, Ontario, involving 16 people who self-identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, and/or trans with a diagnosis of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. Our goal was to learn more about community and community participation for people in these various groups. Participants were interviewed 3 times over the course of 10 months. We had conversations, went on walks, and discussed where people went and where they didn't. We were interested in community involvement, accessibility, and intersections of community spaces and identities. Participants shared where and when they chose to disclose aspects of their identity and how they made these choices. We asked how participants were affected by homophobia, transphobia, and other forms of oppression, and how these experiences differed depending on race, class, and ability. We asked about empowerment, resources, and advocacy. Each participant spoke from their personal experience, and therefore the quotes in this film represent a variety of lived experiences. To bring these experiences to life, we co-created a visual representation of key ideas and messages with the people who we interviewed. This is the result of the collaboration.
You know how a diamond has lots of different sides to it? Well, people's identities are like that. So for me, community means there are different parts that make up our world. Too often, trans and queer people who also identify as having mental health label are made invisible in the mainstream mental health movement. Having spaces that celebrate and acknowledge all identities allows us to be empowered rather than passive subjects.
I intentionally create the community I want to belong in, which is a very different way of understanding community than trying out community services and see if they work for me, because they usually don't. They weren't designed by my community members. They weren't designed by me. They weren't designed by people like me. They were designed by healthcare providers, and they don't know how to create spaces that work for me. Creating community in places where you can just be is extra work that marginalized people have to do to survive in the world.
If there were community groups for LGBTQ people with mental illness, I wouldn't feel like I was the only one. The stigma makes you feel bad about yourself to the point where you don't want to get involved.
I have observed that professionals, support groups, and centers do not exist to support people slowly tapering off major tranquilizers or other psychiatric drugs. It's as if no one is listening to the human experience on these harmful substances. My choice is to not be numbed out for the remaining years of my life from the full experience of life because of the drug class I've been forced on. I would rather manage difficult emotions myself than with a drug. And that is my right to choose that. And it should be my right to have support around this, but in my experience, it doesn't play out that way in actual services and professional response.
I would like to see naturopathic practitioners and psychiatrists work together because I think they could complement each other.
People are not their diagnosis.
I would like to see a clinic where people who are tapering off meds or coming off meds completely could access at their free will. There are addiction withdrawal places, but the system doesn't have any medication withdrawal places or ongoing medication withdrawal support groups or professionals. When people are legitimately upset with things that have happened and come across as angry, people don't like you because they don't think you are one of those inspirational, funny, courageous, recovered persons.
When I came out as trans, my doctor said it was a symptom of being bipolar, and he refused to do anything useful, so I switched doctors.
When I am with other people like me, I don't have to be a girl. I don't have to be a boy. I can just be.
I'd like there to be less mental health awareness that basically says people should go get treatment and that madness is a terrible thing because it denies the fact that mad community can exist. It denies that there could be positive ways of understanding things.
I'm hearing impaired, and it's all people see. So if I'm telling them I'm LGBTQ, they're like, really? Wow, I didn't know people like you existed.
I grew up in a context where it was not good to be a woman, or queer, or crazy, and where there was violent shit. And so it makes sense that I get very scared of people and I don't trust them. Sometimes that turns into extreme fear that looks very different from other people's and it gets called delusional. I think it's rooted in experiences of oppression. I also like to think I just have a really interesting brain.
I am bipolar is all-encompassing. It sounds like it's your whole identity. Having bipolar disorder is like saying it's just a portion of your life.
I like the term psychiatric survivor because I went through a lot of abuse as a psychiatric patient. There's some restrictions getting around in the community because I am in a wheelchair. The wheelchair gets in the way of getting into places and going places sometimes. Sometimes people just look at the wheelchair. They don't look at me. Pride Day, for example, there's nowhere for me to move. There are always just men's crotches in my face, and it's hard for me to move. It's really disappointing because it's hard to meet people.
The services that do exist, a lot of them are siloed with a mental health focus. They don't look at other aspects of people's identities and how they affect people's mental illness. I like services and spaces that combine being queer and trans and mad and look at how they interact together. These differ from many of the existing services and groups which seem to be like, we're here to look at this therapy, so you're just going to have to leave all your other identities at the door.
When I was younger, I felt discouraged because the doctor made judgment statements. These type of comments are always remembered, and they had impacts on me.